chapter for starting as late as we did, because Revelation chapter 18, with the exception of one or two interpretation possibilities overarching the entire chapter, it's a relatively straightforward chapter as far as the meaning and the purpose behind it. And it's also probably one of the more personally applicable chapters in the book of Revelation for us as Christians today. If you remember from chapter 17 and sort of the end of chapter 16, we have been talking about the destruction of this entity known as Babylon. In chapter 17, she is described as a harlot riding the back of the beast, who at the start of it kind of gives the beast direction and is held almost in esteem by the beast. But by the end of it, the beast and all those that serve him turn on this woman, this Babylon, and destroy her. She is told to be a creature of great influence over the beast, that the powers that be kind of listen to her, use her, and use her influence. And we've talked about how I believe this to be kind of the false religion aspect of the world today, and how a lot of political systems, a lot of political leaders throughout the years, all the way back into Old Testament times, like to wield it as some form of power. But as we saw in the chapters prior to that, at the halfway point of the tribulation, when the Antichrist establishes himself as God, sets up an image to him, and institutes the mark of the beast, he is going to toss aside all false religions, destroy them in favor of himself and himself only being worshipped. So while he will use this monicum of religion up until a point, at some point, just like chapter 17 tells us, he will destroy it to adopt himself as being God. Chapter 18, we'll pick up reading, then we can kind of delve into it a little bit more. Verse 1, "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird." So, whereas in the beginning of chapter 17, John is met by one of the angels that had the 7 vials of punishment discussed in previous chapters, another angel comes down to give him chapter 18. As we've discussed many a time before, this is in fact another of the same kind, showing it's the same type of angel as in chapter 17. That's a little bit important because this one's given a little bit more pomp and circumstance than the last one did. This one is described, we saw there in verse 1, as having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. This has led some people to speculate that this angel is in fact Jesus himself. While that is a possible interpretation of it, I don't see it being that, based on the fact that it's another angel, the same as we saw in chapter 7. You say, then how can you describe it radiating his glory? Well, we've seen this before. When Moses came out from seeing the glory of God in person, he also radiated the glory of God. It is common practice that people who are in direct line of the majesty and glory of God shine off that radiant light for a while after leaving his presence. There's a great biblical aspect of that, a great biblical application to that, to whereas we as Christians, the longer we spend in the presence of God and in his word, the longer we should also radiate that out to people, and they should see Christ through us because we are spending time in his presence. This simply applies that this angel has come directly from the presence of God to speak to John. This is again important and again ties in with what we've seen as a theme throughout the book of Revelation, where the punishment that is about to be foretold is happening by direct approval and blessing from God himself. And he comes down and he shines brightly for the world to see. I'd like to think, and this may just be my speculation, so take this with a grain of salt. If you remember during our vial judgments, one of which is the world being cast into darkness, I would like to think that through that darkness, this angel is still be able to shine through, but that's just me possibly over dramatizing it. Verse 2, and he cried with a strong voice, saying, Babylon is fallen and fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. His message is very similar to that of chapter 17, and that is the destruction of Babylon. And here, ultimately, is the main interpretative difference in chapter 18. This Babylon is noted to be slightly different than the Babylon we saw in chapter 17. If you remember in chapter 17, that Babylon was specifically described and pictured as a woman, as a harlot to be exact. And we saw that in verse number 5 of chapter 17. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abomination of the world. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And she is consistently throughout chapter 17 as being described as a woman. And we saw at the end of chapter 17, verse number 17, in fact, verse number 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their heart to fulfill his will, and to agree, and to give their kingdoms unto the beast, unto the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is the great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. This Babylon in chapter 17 is told to be destroyed by the kings that serve the Antichrist. Whereas in chapter 18, we'll see as we go through, this Babylon is described as a city, not as a person. And it's described as being destroyed by God himself, not by the people following the Antichrist. So there's two main trains of thought. I'm not going to tell you which one's right or wrong. I'm going to tell you which one I like personally, but you can determine what God meant by it, because ultimately, as many times throughout Revelation, since there's not a clear interpretation handed to us, the best we can do is pray for an answer and see what God gives us. I believe we are similar to the Babylon in chapter 17. But it's a different aspect of it, and it's a more broad one. There are people who think it is the exact same chapter as chapter 17. There are people who interpret them both as being the literal city of Rome, as we talked about the last 2 weeks in chapter 17. There are people who have interpreted this to mean that the actual city of Babylon along the Euphrates River will be built up again, and it's in reference to that. That's a possibility. I believe personally that it's the same idea as chapter 17. This false entity that is trying to take the place of God, whether it be through false religion, only this aspect of it is the material, luxury chasing, lust for money and power that accompany it. And I'll support that as we go through it. Again, this is not a point I'm willing to die on a hill for, because we are not given an interpretation as to which Babylon is which. Is it a literal place? We don't know. So however God speaks to it for you, the important things to take away are as followed, and we will get to them here. We are seeing that this Babylon in verse number 2 is fallen. That double saying it, that repeating yourself immediately after you're saying it. We've seen that throughout the Bible. It's a very poetic way of drawing importance to what has happened. So this, again, starts off with the fact that Babylon, no matter how great it may seem at any point, it's destroyed. And not only is it destroyed, it's become the habitation of the devil, the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. We are going to see throughout the chapter that this Babylon is specifically associated with great luxury and great opulence and great wealth. But at the end of it, all that's left for all that wealth and all that luxury is a hollow shell of a city infested and possessed with the spirits and the demons of unclean things. This also kind of sets the tone for chapter 18, which is an oddly poetic chapter in comparison to the rest of Revelation. Verse number 3. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Here we get kind of a look at the materialistic side of this Babylon, and it also has enough of chapter 17's references to make me think that they are in fact related. Because he talks about how every king of the earth has dabbled with this and has fallen into her idolatries. It's used there as the word fornications. Has fallen into her idolatries and have committed fornications with her and have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies or her finer things or her grand opulence. Again, this is why I don't think it will be a specific city, because it's hard to tie every king that ever was to one city receiving power and wealth from. We continue on into verse 4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sin, and that ye receive not of her plagues. Another voice rains out of heaven, again, another of the same kind. And this voice warns God's children from distancing themselves from the city. Get out from her. Judgment's going to come, just like Lot and his wife and his children. We are given a chance to escape the wrath that is going to come to the city. This is why I don't think it's exactly the same as chapter 17 and exactly the same of that false religion, because it's very hard for a child of God to live, to dwell, and to thrive in a completely false religion. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very rare. Whereas this material aspect of it, this greed and this need for every luxury, that is something that the children of God struggle with just the same as the children of men. Yesterday was a trying day, as you heard before the service. Those of you watching at home, the long story short is I spent a good 13 hours trying to make a toilet flush, including 6 trips to Home Depot, 2 trips onto the roof in the snow, my dad, my pastor, and very possibly a priest to do an exorcism. But I came to the startling revelation halfway through the day. I could have solved all of that if I was rich. You know how easy it would have been to call someone who knew what they were doing first thing in the morning, say, hey, I will give you $1,000 to make my toilet flush. I don't care what you have to do, make it happen. My life would have been happier. The missus would have been happier with me. We would have had a towel that would have been dried the entire day. My hands would not still be slightly stained blue from the toilet cleaner that was in the back of the tank and still slightly sticky from the wax. It does not come off. It would be nice to be rich. Money, it does not buy happiness, but boy, can it rent it. And we as Christians fall into the same struggles of materialism that the world does, which is why God sends a message to his children to get out while you can. Because, and we'll see what happens. Verse number 5. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. We get almost a picture of the Tower of Babel here, where the sins of the people, the desire for that power and that I am God, I can do what I want attitude, reaching up to heaven. And one of the most terrifying statements in the Bible, her iniquities will be remembered. This goes in direct contrast to what we know in Hebrews 8:12. You don't have to turn there for time's sake, but mark it down. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. We as Christians are given the incredible gift that the God of the universe, who always is, who always was, who can remember everything that's ever happened, and knows without even hesitation who flushed what down my toilet that won't make it go down. He chooses to forget my sins because I'm saved. But this Babylon, her sins are so bad, he's going to remember them. And he's going to hold her accountable to them. Back to chapter 17. Or chapter 18, verse 6. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works, and the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. Her punishment is whatever she has dealt out, she is going to receive back against her double. She is going to have to, as it were, pay the debt that she owes twice over. This is important because according to Levitical law back in Exodus chapter 22, specifically verses 4 through 9, if the theft be certainly found in the hand alive, whether it be an ox or ass or sheep, he shall restore double. If a man shall cause a field or vineyard to be eaten, and shall put in his beast, and shall feed another man's field of best of his own field, and of the best of his own vineyard shall make restitution if fire breaks out and catch the thorns of the stack of corn and standing corn where the fields consumed therewith. He that kindles the fire shall surely make restitution. If a man shall deliver unto his neighbor money or stuff to keep, and it be stolen out of the man's house, if the thief be found, let him pay double. If the thief be not found, then the master of the house shall be brought unto the judge to see whether he be put in his hands unto his neighbor's goods. It's in the part of the law that we kind of tend to gloss over because it is very repetitive and a lot of it doesn't apply to us. Bacon's still on the menu, help yourselves. But it's an important principle that theft specifically requires a double repayment. Further on down, it discussed how if that neighbor who caused your stuff to be stolen, if it's determined he's at fault, he has to pay back the double that the thief would have to pay back. Whereas if he just caused his field to be eaten, he had to pay it once. If he destroys something, he has to pay it once. If he steals something, that's when the double repayment comes. I find that significant because that is truly what this materialistic lifestyle brings to us. It robs us. It's robbing from us peace of mind. It's robbing from us money by which we could do good to others. It's robbing to us time. It is robbing us chasing after stuff, chasing after luxuries. Back to Revelation. Verse 7, how much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her, for she saith in her heart, I sit a queen and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. We see her sins spelled out for all humanity to see. Lived deliciously. She was self-indulgent. All she worried about was her comforts and what she can do for her. saith in her heart, I sit a queen. She was proud and arrogant. She thought she was the most important being there is, and she proclaimed herself to be a queen. Am no widow and shall see no sorrow. I'm here today to tell you that if you had all the money in the world, you could buy away a very large portion of your troubles. Most, not all, but most of the troubles in your life, you could buy away if you were rich. And that's what she tried to do. I'm not going to see any troubles. I'm not going to become a widow. I'm going to suffer nothing because I am going to pay my way through. Because I am a queen, I deserve this. I am, in fact, more important than I am, and I'm going to live deliciously. I'm going to live in luxury. I'm going to live the life I deserve to live. Verse 8, therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and shall utterly be burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And so we see her destruction. In one day, quick and instant. We talked about this last chapter when we talked about a certain time frame, something happening in an hour. It gives the idea of an expedited destruction. When it comes, it's going to be quick and it's going to be total. It's going to be an all-consuming destruction. There is a thought out there that this is speaking of a literal city that will be destroyed, and that its means of destruction is going to be nuclear. We'll get into why they think that going into it. Do I think it to be true or false? I don't know. It's an interesting theory. I say, let's see what happens. Granted, I'll be in heaven at the time, but the destruction is going to be quick and is going to be total. Verse 9, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, and shall bewail her and lament her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. This is why I think we're speaking of a slightly different aspect than we are in chapter 17, because in chapter 17, the kings that are in league with her are the ones to destroy her, whereas in this chapter, the kings that were in league with her are standing afar off, wailing her destruction. So while there's similarities there, there is enough difference to make me think we're at least speaking of a different aspect of it. Verse 10, standing afar off from fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city, in 1 hour thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stone and of pearl and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and the thymy wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and of brass and of iron and of marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. We see a couple things out of that passage. While most of it's pretty straightforward, I don't need to explain to you what scarlet and purple are. The thymy wood that's described there is a special, very fragrant wood that they would use in sacrifice that was very expensive, because every item that's in that list is a luxury and not a requirement. Every item that's listed down there that the merchants of the world are wailing over because there is no more market for their stuff to be sold in is a luxury. This harkens back to the first set of plagues when the seals are broken and that first famine goes over the world, and God specifically tells them as the famine is happening not to hurt the oils and wines. Here, those luxury items that were spared the original judgment are still there, but nobody wants them. They're still there, but there's no reason to buy them. The merchandising lifestyle, that need to own, that driving plague of buy, is gone. And I love how it describes the kings in mourning over this, because it describes them as standing afar off, going, whoa, whoa, whoa. They're not standing close because they're afraid of the judgment that has rained upon them. They're staying outside the city. We saw this in verse number 10, standing afar off for fear of her torment. They're standing back and they're wringing their hands, going, oh, the great city has fallen. Whoa, 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 the great city has gone. They're not willing to step up and try to save her. They're just going to stand afar off and mourn what is being taken away from them. And that item that's being taken away is the sale of all the goods that they have. All the great things. And it ends very interestingly, because as they've reached down through all this laundry list of luxury items, gold, silver, that at the end of the day don't mean to anything. It ends with the souls of men. And I think that has a great many applications, and you could preach great a many sermon off that phrase. But I think it's pertinent and ties into what exactly it costs people who chase after luxury above all else. Now you're saying, Tim, you said this is related to chapter 17, if not the same thing. Where are you getting the religious end of this? How many false religions have been built on the idea of money? How many false preachers are there out there with mansions and private jets and fine cars and the great and glory, anything and everything they could possibly want? Money, or let me rephrase that, the love of money has spawned many a false religion. Luxury and opulence has been the birthing of many a cult and many an idolatrous situation. How many Christians, let's just take it in the Baptist church circle. How many good fundamental Baptist churches have gone the way of the dodo for money? And it's never as wicked as it sounds, like with the people with the private jets and the Mercedes and all that. It always starts so innocently. Like, hey, if we get more people in the seats, our offerings are bigger, we can keep the doors open a little bit better. And besides which, if we get more people in the seat, we can tell more people about God. So let's drop this down a little bit and we can get more people in the seats. All of it tied to all these luxurious items that cost men their literal souls. Verse 14, and the fruits that thy soul lusteth after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. This chapter is important. And the concept, it stands a little out from the rest of Revelation because it is a very poetic chapter. It's very reminiscent to the Old Testament judgments that were prophesied about. And it sounds very, like I said, aside from a couple key items, it's a very straightforward chapter. A city is destroyed and the merchants are mourning the fact that their luxury items have no value anymore. But this is important because we have seen throughout Revelation the systematic destruction of the world. Whether it be the plagues that take away the food, the rivers, the oceans, and all the wildlife on the earth. Whether it be the diseases that infect man. Whether it be the oppressive heat or the oppressive darkness. A lot of them, you could sit there and say, well, if I were rich enough, I could defend against those. The demonic locusts that crawl around stinging men. If I have enough money, I could build a bunker and no bug can get to me. Here it's showing that amongst all these plagues, the ultra-rich, the untouchables, the ones you look at and go, they can't even comprehend the problems I face in my day-to-day life. I can guarantee you, as sure as I'm standing here, Bill Gates has never once climbed on his roof at 11 o'clock at night in the snow to try to unclog a toilet. I can almost guarantee that. Maybe in his younger years, not recently. They will be affected too. Because while it doesn't seem like that big of a deal for us that all of a sudden, oh no, the gold can't be bought anymore. That's not going to affect my day-to-day life much. It's going to make Christmas a little harder to shop for, but I can make do. For some people, this will be the biggest destruction yet. For some people, bigger than the destruction of the world itself, watching their bank account all of a sudden just poof, vanish. Or even worse, their bank account still be there, but be worthless. That's going to be a destruction and a judgment that we can't possibly comprehend. If I can sit up here and say, guys, at some point, all those things you hold dear, all the riches, all the wealth, all the luxuries you own will someday be taken away from you, a lot of us, that's not going to affect much. Oh no, they're going to take away my new toilet that allegedly can flush 7 billiard balls. On that side note, I will be headed to Walmart afterwards hunting 7 billiard balls. I want to test this. Pastor, if you're out in the lobby, brace yourself. When it goes wrong, you'll be getting a phone call. That doesn't affect us much. All our luxuries being taken away, so what? If I told Brother Darrell I'm going to take away all his luxury, he's going to go, yes, I become a mountain man. I've trained for this my whole life. He's going to rip off his clothes. He's going to have a mountain man camo on, and he's going out in the mountain. You're never going to see him again. But there are people who, if you preach this to, most of them tied into false religions, they're going to be hugging themselves in a cold sweat. Oh, you mean the telephone? We'll pick up here next week because I'm low on time. Because remember, the big part of this chapter was at the very beginning. We are in a position of Lot and Lot's wife where God has warned us to get out from this city. Escape it while you can. Save yourself before judgment rains down upon the city. And it's specifically us because he tells it to his children. Save yourselves from this and watch how much you get tied into the material because it's all going to go away very soon. We'll get into that, cover it a little bit more, and finish up the destruction of Babylon next week. Let's go ahead and pray. Dear most Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you've given to us. We thank you for the opportunity and privilege we had to come into your house. I ask you to bless the rest of today. Help everything we do be for your glory and for your honor. And we ask it all in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. With that, take a few minutes, stretch, go grab a bottle of water, a cup of coffee, and we'll be back to it in about 5 to 10 minutes.